Good evening, class. How's everyone doing? Hope you had a good Labor Day weekend. Stayed cool. At least tried. All right, let's see. Who do we have today? Eduardo. Hello, Eduardo. Miguel. Hello, Miguel, and Roger. Hello, Roger. Okay, so we are going to begin module 2 this week. Before we do, any questions? Anything regarding the lab or anything like that? I'll go over that first. No questions? I'm sure I also mentioned this, but feel free to use the chat feature as well if you do have any questions or if there's something something you'd like to share, as well as feel free to unmute yourself if you do have any questions. You don't have to use the raise hand feature or anything like that. So Eduardo, are the discussions required? Yes, the discussions are required, and they will be part of your participation grade, which is 10%. And as far as what you should put in the discussions, I'll leave that pretty much up to you. You can put, for example, if you have a specific question, you can include a question. That would be okay. If there's something new you learned that you want to share, you can put that. If there's something on the web that you did your own kind of research on and you learned, feel free to share something like that. So it's pretty much, it's nothing specific that you need to put there. As long as you participate, you put something in there. Or if somebody has a question and you help that student out, that would also be fine. So I don't necessarily read all of them. When I go to grade your discussions, I just look to see if there's something there. So did you put something in the discussions? And that's really all I'm looking for. But of course, I mean, you don't want to just put anything that's non-related to this class. So if you do that, I'll probably see it and that won't count. But as long as it's related to JavaScript programming, you know, something in this sort of area, that's okay, that's fine. Hope that answers your question. All right, so any other questions? No, no other questions? Okay. Okay, so like I mentioned last week, the first 2 modules in this class I use for review. This is again just to get you just to get up to speed with the programming language itself. Okay, so we don't cover anything specific to the mean stack in modules 1, 2, also 3 as well. So really the first 3 modules, we don't cover anything specific to stack. It's mainly review. And I go over what you're expected to know in terms of the programming language itself. Okay. So if what I'm going to go over today you feel okay with, it's things that you've seen before at least, or it's things that you have actually done, then you should be okay. All right, so that's going to be sort of, you know, you'll sort of know if you're prepared for this class after I get done with what I'm going to cover today. So I should give you enough information there. All right. So what we're going to do today in specific is we're gonna do a little bit of a script review. So we're just going to go over, you know, if statements, loops, arrays, objects, things that come up in this class. Okay, it's not a comprehensive review. Okay, so it's not going to cover everything, but it will cover the things that come up in this class. Okay, so I try to just include what you're going to need to know in this class here. We're also going to do a jQuery review, and I use jQuery a lot in this class, at least before we learn the client side frameworks. And reason for that is just I can write shorter code. That's pretty much it. It's just to help me keep the code as short and concise as I can. So that's why I use it in this class. So that's going to be something else that I go over. Okay, so I'm going to jump to an empty project. All right, so I have an empty project here. I know last week I assigned the Bootstrap assignment. So I'm going to be sort of covering the Bootstrap as well as I go along. Okay, so it should be a comprehensive review, including Bootstrap. The version of Bootstrap we're going to be using in this class is version 4. It's because I haven't switched to version 5 yet in this class. So it's pretty similar. Almost all the classes and components that exist in version 5, it also exists in version 4. However, there are a few changes that require me to sort of redo a little bit of some of the examples and things like that I have in this class. So we're going to be sticking to version 4. If you want to use version 5, that's okay with me. So I'm not gonna say that you have to use version 4. I'm just going to be using version 4, like I said, because the assignments and things like that have version 4 in there, and I don't want to confuse you there. So we're gonna stick with version 4. So again, if you didn't catch where I clicked from the getbootstrap.com homepage, there is a version 4.6x docs. So that's what I selected, and that takes me to this page here. All right. So first thing let's go over is how to add Bootstrap to your application. So I already have the Bootstrap script, so I'm just going to remove them and just start out with an empty HTML page right here. All right, so we have the doc type tag at the top, and that just tells the web browser that we're going to be using HTML version 5, and that's what that is. Then we have the main HTML tag here, and we're setting a specific locale. So a specific language for this, and this is used for search engines as well as your web browser. So it'll use that as well, just to know sort of what the what language of the page is. Then we have a few actually Bootstrap specific things here. So I'm gonna remove those as well, so we could sort of start from scratch. All right, so let's remove that as well. All right, so we have an empty HTML page at this point here. So the way we're going to add Bootstrap to this page is in the introduction page. That's the first page that comes up. We'll scroll down here and it tells you sort of what you need to add. But what I find more helpful is this complete version here. So under this starter template, we'll have the complete HTML to get you started. So since I already have, well, I don't have too much here, so we can just copy and paste it. So we will copy that and we will replace that. So the first part here, it just sets the character set of the page. Then this is a Bootstrap specific tag that we can set sort of a false, and usually don't change this, so that's going to remain as is. Then we have the main Bootstrap CSS file, so the cascade style sheet file is here. We have the page title, so I'm going to rename this since I had something before, so CS112 module 2 examples, right? So we have just an H1 tag. We'll leave that there. And version 4 of Bootstrap uses jQuery. So jQuery is required. However, in version 5, they removed it. So jQuery is not required in version 5. But for at least in this class, we do use jQuery, so I am going to have it there, so it's okay. So the first script tag brings in jQuery. Okay. Something that I want to mention here is that they include the slim version of jQuery. As you can see here, there is jQuery.slim.min. And the slim version strips out some of the less used sort of aesthetic sort of things that, like I said, not used that often. So it just makes the script a little bit smaller. So that's why they opted to use that. However, in this class, we do use the full version of jQuery. So when the time comes, I will just switch over to the full version, and you can do that by just simply removing this word slim here. But when you do that, remember you would have to either change this integrity hash here or just remove it. So that's okay. We'll do that. And then the second script is the actual Bootstrap script, right? And that is the Bootstrap bundle.min. So that is required. And there are two options. This first option includes this third-party popper component inside of the Bootstrap bundle script. And this option 2 just includes it as a separate script file. In this class, we don't even use that component. So, but I tend to just remove option 2 and just stick with option 1. Okay, that's a comment, so we remove that. So we end up with an empty Bootstrap application here. Right? So that's going to be our starting point. Okay, so I'm going to start out here. Before I go to any of the script, I'm going to put a little HTML here that we're going to use. The first thing I want to create is a div with a class of container. And this is a Bootstrap specific class that ensures that the spacing on the left and right side is sort of responsive, and also it prevents your content from starting at the leftmost margin. It gives you a little bit of space there. So we could see that. So if I move this H1 inside of the container, you'll see that the H1 moves a little bit to the right-hand side. And that allows you to sort of adjust, not adjust, that spaces it out in a more correct way here. And as you can see, it will adjust as the page gets bigger and smaller. All right, so we're going to do that. I'm not going to have the H1 there, so we're going to remove that. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a input and a button that we can click. So all form components should go in a form tag. Okay, so we're going to start out with a form tag. So open and close. And as far as the classes go, I want to set a Bootstrap specific class here called a form inline. And by default, forms are not inline, which means that every form component that you put, for example, inputs, they will take up the full row. So if you have two inputs, there'll be one above the other. However, there are times when you don't want that. You sort of want the forms to be to come in like one after the other in a single row. And in that case, you want the form elements to be inline, and that's what this form inline is for. All right, so that's going to create our form elements, and now we can actually put the form elements inside, and we're going to start out with an input. Okay, so that's going to be a text box, and we'll give this an ID of email address. All right, so it's just an ID tag, and we're going to set this input type to email. Then we're going to set some, again, Bootstrap specific classes. So the first is we want to make sure that this this input is responsive. So we give it the class form control. And if you're curious where I'm finding these CSS classes or how I get these CSS classes, these are all in the components area here. Okay, so for example, we started out with a container. So I would go down here to the that one. The container might be under a different section. Let's see here where that is. Maybe it is under components. Or maybe it's under layout. Yes, it's under layout here. And as you can see, containers. So containers are the most basic layout element. And like you see, we have the container here, and you can adjust also the max width and things like that. And we have an example right over here. Right, so div with the class of container. Right, that's exactly what we have here. And then the form inline, that is under the components and under forms. So we go there, and there is a inline form area, and we can find that. So let's go there, layout. Right, no, it's not that. Horizontal form. Right here. The form inline class displays a series of labels form controls on a single horizontal row, right? So we have the example here. We have all these form elements all in one row. And as you can see, we have form with the class of inline. Okay, so if you're curious as to, again, where I'm finding these classes, they all come from this components or this page here. Okay, that goes over that one. Okay, so that's an input. We also want to set a placeholder, and this is sort of the grayed out text that is displayed when there isn't anything in the input. So for example, we'll see how this looks. So let's click on run, and as you can see, this is the input that we just created. And as you can see, there's email address there. And as soon as I begin to type, that goes away. And if it's empty, it appears. And that's this placeholder here that we set. Okay. All right. So we want a button that we can click right after it. Okay, so right in this area here. So for that, we'll create a button element. We'll give it an ID of click BTN, and we'll set the button type to button. This type is very important, right? So in this class, all of our buttons are going to be a type of button. The default behavior of a button is going to be submit. And what submit will do is it will actually do a post to the server, and it will send all form elements inputs to the server. And we are not going to be doing that in this class, okay? And so you wanna make sure that this is not submit, and instead it's a type of button. Then we're gonna set some CSS classes. Again, we are gonna follow the Bootstrap classes, and if we go down to the buttons component, you'll see the buttons that we have here. So primary, secondary, success, danger, warning, info, and these are just themes, right? And this is the HTML that creates these buttons here, right? So the first button, the blue button, is going to be this here, and as you can see, it has a class of BTN, and then it sets the theme of the button, and BTN-primary will give us a blue button. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So BTN-primary. Right, that's going to create a blue button. Right, and we'll just say click me. Right, we hit run, and as you can see, we get the input and the button right here. Right. And below the form, so here, we're going to create a div alert. Okay, again, we are going to use a Bootstrap component, and the component name is alert. So alerts, they just create this sort of rectangular themed square box that we can put things in. Right, so that is going to have a class of alert, and then we also set the alerts theme, and alert primary will give us a blue alert box, just like this. Okay, and we will close out the div there, and inside of this, we'll put this is an alert box. I also want to set a ID for this because we are going to be selecting it, and I'll give it an ID of alert 1 here. And let's just add another one below it, and this other one just going to have an ID of alert 2. Okay. So let's click on run and see what we have here. Right, as you can see, we have a responsive sort of form layout here. I want to go over the Bootstrap spacing classes. So I do use that quite often. So let's go ahead and cover that. And these specifically on the Bootstrap page are going to be under let's see what they're under. Utilities, spacing. Yes. Okay, so under utilities and under spacing. Okay, and what these classes allow you to do is add some spacing between components, right? So for example, as you can see, this input and this button, they're right up against each other, right? And oftentimes you want some space in between these here. So this is how it's done. So Bootstrap, CSS padding, and margins, padding and margin classes. Okay. So first of all, padding, right? Padding is defined by the spacing inside of a box or a component, say, right? So that would be defined. Second here. Okay, so if we have an alert, that would be defined by the spacing here, right? Top spacing, left spacing, the bottom, and this spacing to the right here, right? So this would be the padding. The spacing outside of the box, for example, this spacing here, the spacing on the left, the spacing on the bottom, the spacing on the right, this spacing is the margin. Okay, so it's important that we define those. Now that we know what padding and margins are, so let me just add this here: the spacing outside of the box or a component. All right, so padding and margin. Okay, so now that we know that, if we add the class PT with the hyphen and a number between 1 and 6. So this sets the top padding. Okay, so we're going to have quite a few of these. So I will just paste them. Let's see if 7 of them to be specific. So that's 5, okay, 6, and 7. Okay, so PT will set the top padding. PR will set the right padding. PB will set the bottom padding. PL will set the left padding. PX will set the left and right padding all at the same time. PY will set the top and bottom padding at the same time. And then finally, just P will set the top, right, bottom, and left paddings at the same time, right? So I'll just copy that and paste it below, and all we do is just change the P to an M, and as you might guess, this sets the margins instead. Right, so we get the top margin, right margin, bottom margin, left margin, left and right margin. Oops, this is not PYT, this is just PY, and this is just MY. Right, so top and bottom margin, and then finally the margins all over. Okay, so for example, if we want to add some spacing between this input and this button, we want to set the either the left margin for the button or the right margin for the input. So we'll go down to this input here, and right in the class, we will set the margin MR, and we'll put a hyphen, and then we can use the numbers between 0 and 6, or I'm sorry, 1 and 6. So if we set the margin MR of 3, you'll see now that we have some spacing in between. Okay, so go ahead and clear out drawings. All right, so like I said, I use these a lot in this class, just so if you do see them, this is what I'm doing. Okay. Now that we have some HTML on the page, let's go to the script. Okay, so I'm just gonna create a script tag here. When I do these examples, I like to put all my code in the HTML page itself in script tags. And the reason why I do that is for example purposes, and that is so I could sort of remain on one page, and I just have to scroll sort of up to get to the HTML and then scroll down to get to the code. You know, but in the real world or in a real application, you don't want to do this. You want to have your script files be, you want to have your code be in separate script files outside of the HTML, and then refer to them in your HTML. If I do that here, I'm going to have to have this open, which picks up a space, as well as I have to go from one file to the other, and it sort of makes it a little bit harder to switch between HTML and code, which is the reason why they include them all in the page here. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure our script runs in what is known as a strict mode, and for that we put a string right at the top of the script tag, and we use the string to use strict. Okay, and what this does is this ensures that we run JavaScript in secure mode. And this was introduced in ES version 6. And what this does is it prevents you from doing things like that, right? So we have to use the let or the var to define X here. And if we don't do that, then it's going to throw an error. And it does a few other things which I don't want to go over right now, but it is a good idea to run your code in strict mode. Okay, so the first part here is we're going to do a JavaScript review, and then we will jump to jQuery. Okay, so first thing, let's start out very simple. So variables. Okay, and variables are used to store data in memory. And we want to avoid using the var, and we want to use let instead. And I'll go over what I mean by that. So, for example, if we have a function, and I know we haven't gone over functions yet, we'll go over it right after this. But if we have a function called test, and we have a if statement here, and again, I haven't gone over if statements, but that's okay. So if we define X inside of this if statement, right, we set it, let's say we set it to the value of 10, but we use the var keyword to declare X. And now let's use the let keyword to declare Y, and we'll set that to the value of for example. So the main difference between X and Y is that X is scoped to the whole test function. Okay, so even though we have declared X inside of this if statement, we can access X outside the if statement. Right? We could do a console log of X, right? And we should get X, right? So let's do that. And as you can see, we get the output of 10, right? Which means that even though we have declared it inside of a if statement, inside of this block, it's still scoped to the entire test. Okay. Whereas if we use the let keyword, a Y is scoped to the code block. And a code block is defined by a open curly brace and close curly brace. So in this specific case, it is scoped to inside the if statement, right? So we cannot access Y from outside of the if statement. And if we try doing that, we're going to get a error. See, Y is not defined. Okay, so that's the main difference between let and var is the scoping. So X can be accessed, and here Y cannot be accessed. Okay, so this class we want to stick with let because it just has a either scope, right? The scope is more what is the word I'm looking for? It's it has a tighter scope, right? And it prevents, it prevents things like this where we can change the value of something we defined here outside of the block. And it allows us to redefine things that are called the same thing. So we can define, we can declare X here, and it would be, I'm sorry, we can declare Y outside of the if block and it would be okay because this Y is scoped to that code block and this Y is scoped to the entire function here, right? Okay, so variables, that is that. Now let's move on to functions. So functions, there are three types of functions. We have named functions, we have anonymous functions, and we have arrow functions. All right, so first type of function is, let's go over named. So named functions, and the way we create a function is with the function keyword. I'm sorry, the way we create a named function is with the function keyword, and we give the function a name. So in this case, let's say we want the function to be called add nums, and we can accept its arguments, right? So we are accepting the argument of num1 and the argument of num2. And this function is going to return the value of num1 plus num2, which is going to sum these two, and it'll return that. Right. And if we console.log this, right, oh, and also now that we have the function, if you want to call the function, we refer to the function, and we pass in the arguments. So let's pass in 10 and 5. So we should get an output of 15. This is throwing the error, so I can comment that out. I'm sorry, not that one. This one is throwing the error. Okay, so we get the value of 15. We can also set defaults to these values that are passed in. So to do that, we just set it equal to a default value. Okay, so we can set num2 to be a default of 1, or we might want to set these both to a default of 0. So if we just call the function without passing the two values, they are going to be equal to 0. So this will not throw any kind of error, right? So this will just be 0 plus 0, and the output will be 0. Right? And as you can see, we get an output of 0. Okay. All right. Moving on to the next type of function, and that is anonymous functions, or sometimes referred to as inline functions. Okay. So an inline function is a function that is defined in a location where a function reference is required. And usually this will be a callback function. So for example, if we use the set timeout, which runs some code after a certain amount of time, that takes in a function here, or let's say the function name, and the amount of time that we want to wait before this function is called. So of course, if we already have a function defined outside, we could just refer to it. However, we can just create a function inline, and those inline functions are called anonymous. So to do that, all we do is we use the function keyword, but this time we don't give it any name. And if this callback function will take in any, if it'll accept any arguments, then those arguments would go here. But in this case, there are none. So then we have the open and close curly brace, and the amount of time. So let's say we want to wait 2 seconds and run this function here, right? So it's console.log. Hello from set timeout. Okay. Right, so let's click on run, and after 2 seconds, we should see hello from set timeout. Okay. So this example is not for the set timeout. This example was for this anonymous function. Okay. All right, and then finally, arrow functions. And this was introduced in ES version 6, I believe, as well. So let's define what arrow functions are. So arrow functions are like anonymous functions, but a shorthand version. But shorthand versions. They are mostly similar with a few differences. The biggest difference, the biggest being that the this reference in an arrow function refers to its parent object the this reference in a named function or anonymous function refers to the caller object. Okay, what does this mean? Okay, let's go and create a arrow function. Before we create an arrow function, let's first create a regular function, and let's actually create an anonymous function and convert it. All right, let's do that. So we can do this. We can say let anon function. Now, what's interesting is I actually forgot to point out is we could assign anonymous functions to a var. If that makes any sense. So we can essentially turn an anonymous function into a named function by doing that. So for example, we can say let anon function equal to an anonymous function. And let's say this anonymous function, again, let's just do a very simple example, takes num1 and num2 and returns num1 plus num2. Right, so we have an anonymous function and we're assigning this anonymous function to what we're calling a non function. And we can do things like this. Okay? And this is similar to a named function. But the main difference here is that we can now pass this anonymous function to other functions, and those other functions can then call this anonymous function. Right? Getting a little bit too involved, I don't want to go over that right now. But let's say we wanted to convert this into a function. So let's call this second declaration let arrow function equal. So let's first just copy this and go over what we need to do. So the first thing we need to do to convert it is we remove the keyword. So we remove the function keyword. So we end up with this. And then we add an equal and a greater than sign, right? Which the name comes from, right? So it's a right arrow here, right? So this now will do the exact same thing. Right? So we can do console log arrow function, and let's pass it the values 2 and 3, and we should get 7 out. And we get 7, so we're good there. Okay, so you might ask yourself, how is this helpful? Well, for one, we don't have this function keyword, so that saves some space. Furthermore, there are certain rules that apply to these functions in certain conditions. Rule number 1 is if there is only one line in an arrow function, you could remove the curly braces. All right, so we can remove the curly braces and bring this to the same line. There is another rule that if there is just one line of code and that line of code is a return, then we can also remove the return keyword. So we end up with something like that, right? And as you can see, this is much shorter than this, right? Okay, so if we run this again, you'll see that we get exactly the same value. Okay. So those are our functions. Now, you could replace all anonymous functions with arrow functions, with the exception of if we are using the this pointer inside of the function. And I don't want to go over that right now. I'll go over this when we're actually doing the examples that use this. But just to let you know real quick is that we oftentimes use the this pointer when we are creating a event handler, and we want to refer to the HTML element that raised the event or caused the event to occur. So this keyword will refer to that specific element. If we try to use this keyword in an anonymous function, it will not be equal to the HTML element that raised the event. Instead, it'll be equal to the anonymous function's parent. That parent is going to be depending on where that anonymous function is. So that's one of the few, but that's the most important one, in my opinion. And when I get to doing an example that uses this keyword, I will make sure to point it out. So for now, I'll skip that example. Okay, and that's pretty much it for the functions, the three types of functions that we use in this class. Let's take a look at arrays. Okay. So arrays, let's first define an array. So let's define an array called cars, and we'll put in Ford, Chevy, Toyota, and let's put Honda. Okay, so we have a cars array with these 4 elements. Okay, so if we want to add a new element to the array, we use the push function. So for example, cars.push adds a new element to this array. So let's say we want to add Kia. Right, so this adds a new element to the end of the array. And let's get console.log just to make sure we're getting the correct output. And as you can see, we have Kia at the end of that array. Okay, we could also remove an element from within the array. So remove or add, actually, we can use this same function to add as well, but at least in this class, we only use it to remove. So add remove elements from the middle of the array. Okay, so for example, let's say we wanted to remove Toyota. We use the function splice. And splice takes 3 arguments, but to remove an element, it's going to take 2 arguments. So the first argument is the starting point. So where do we want to begin removing things? So this is the zero index of the element, where Ford is element 0, Chevy is element 1, and Toyota is element 2. So if we want to remove Toyota, we need to put the starting index, so that's going to be 2. Then the next argument is how many do we want to remove from that element. So if we just want to remove one, then we put the number 1. Right? So splice to 1 will remove only one element, and the starting index is going to be index 2. Right? So Toyota will be removed. Okay, so let's run it, and as you can see, Toyota is no longer in the array. Right, and then finally, well, not finally for arrays in general, but if we want to get how many elements are in the array, we use the length property of the array. So cars dot length will give us the number of elements in the array. Okay. So we use the length here to get that. So again, let's run it. So there are 4 elements in the array. Okay, so still on arrays. So let's talk a little bit about array filtering. Okay, so this is used for searching the array and returning things in the array. The first is the filter function. So the filter function returns a new array based on a Boolean expression. Okay, so let's do an example. Let's say let found cars. And let's say we just wanna we just wanna find Chevy and Ford, or Honda. Let's do Chevy and Honda, because we know those are in the array. Okay, so what we do is we refer to the cars array. We use the filter function, and the filter function is going to accept a callback function. So we could just define an anonymous function right inside. And the callback function is going to accept the element of the array, right? That is going to be passed into it, right? So the idea here is when we call this filter function, internally, it will loop through this array. And for each of elements in the array, those elements are going to be passed into our callback function, which we are defining here. And depending on if we return true or false, we'll determine if that element is going to be included in the final array that this filter function is going to return. Okay. So if we just return true, then all of these elements are going to be included in this found parse. And if we return false, then we won't get any elements in this found parse. So we can use this to check to see if a specific car is equal to what we want to find. Right? So we can say, let's say, for example, if car is equal to Chevy, or car is equal to Honda, then we want to return true. Okay, I hope that makes sense. It's console log found cars. And as you can see, the array has 2 elements now, and it has elements Chevy and Honda. Right? Okay, so we know that if we have an anonymous function, we can convert it to an arrow function. Right? So let's go ahead and do that, and you'll see that this code will go from 3 lines to a single line. Right? All right. So again, if you want to convert an autonomous function to an arrow function, the first thing we need to do is we remove the function keyword. We put a right arrow like that. Okay. And we can make this if statement. We can actually remove this if statement and just return this, right? We can just do this because this is going to return either a true or false, right? So we actually have a single line of code, and remember, in arrow functions, the 2 rules is if there is a single line of code inside of the arrow function, and if that is a return, we can remove the return keyword, and we can remove the curly braces, right? And we end up with that. There's one other rule that says if this callback function just returns a single argument, you can remove the open and close parentheses as well. So we end up with that, right? So this is going to give us the exact same value. Chevy and Honda. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. All right, so the next array filtering function is the find function, and this works almost the same as the filter function. The find function returns the first found item in the array, right? So whereas the filter function returns a new array with more than one item, the find will return one element from that array, right? We will not return a new array. Okay, so we can do something like let's found car equals to car dot find, and let's do another arrow function, car, where car is equal to, for example, Kia. So what's important here, what's important that I want to point out here is that found cars in this example is going to be an array, whereas found car in this find function is going to be a string, right? It's going to return an element, one of these elements. And these elements are all strings. So the find, we expect it's going to return a string. So found car is going to be a string. Right? So I didn't do that. So that was for the cars, and this is found car. Oh, and as you can see, we get a string, Kia. All right, almost done with this. A couple more things. So conditionals, and pretty straightforward, right? These are if statements. So for example, if 5 is equal to 5, right? Else, we can have an else if 6 is equal to 6, and then finally an else statement. You see a question. Did you say found cars is an array and found cars is going to be, yes, correct. Correct, Marco. Found cars will be an array because there's the alter function can return more than one of what's in the array. And if it can return more than one, it has to be an array. So this returns a new array, which is going to be a subset of this cars array, whereas the find function will return an element, a single element from within the array. So in this case, it's going to be a string. Right? Okay, conditionals. All right, so if statement block, right, means that we have this first if statement. So if this is true, the code inside of here will run. If this is not true, then this second else if statement is going to be checked. And if that is true, then the code inside of that else if will run. And finally, if the first if is not true and the second if is not true, then the code in the else statement will run. Right. All right. Objects. Okay, objects. This comes up a lot in this class. Okay, so make sure you are very, very comfortable with these. Objects are self-contained collections of key value pairs. And object keys are referred to as properties. So for example, let's define an object. So we'll say we'll define an object called person. And the way we define an object is with the open curly brace. So with open and close curly brace. And they, like I said, they consist of key value pairs. So let's say this person has a first name, and we put the name of that key, we put a colon, and we put the value of that field. So first name John, comma, then last name Smith. And let's actually create one more, age. Right. So they are self-contained, right? Which means that if we pass this object from one function to another, what's inside of the function gets passed at the same time, right? So it's just a self-contained object. It's in the name. That we could pass around. Okay. So for example, if we want to output the first name, we refer to the person object, we use the dot syntax, and we refer to the first name, right? So this first name is referring to this first name that we defined here. Right, so the first name we should expect John, right? So let's make sure. And as you can see, we get John there. And that's really all I want to talk about objects. There is one other thing that comes up in this class that is oftentimes a little confusing, is that we can add new properties to existing objects by just referring to a new property. Kind of strange, right? So for example, we know that this object does not have a property called a state, right? But let's say we wanted to add state to this. So all we do is we refer to the object and we refer to what we want to call it. In this case, we want to call it state, and we set it to CA, let's say, right? So now just by referring to state, even though we didn't include it in this object, we didn't refer to it, we didn't say it would be added later on, right? As long as we refer to it, it's going to add it automatically, right? So if we console.log the person, you'll see that now the person object has a state, okay, which was not in the object before. Okay, moving on. JSON. So JSON allows us to convert objects to string versions and convert string versions of objects back into objects. So, for example, if we wanted to convert this person object to a string, right? All we really need to do is we'll say let JSON text. We refer to the JSON class, and we use the function stringify. Okay, so we want to stringify or convert to a string the person object. So what we get is just the string, right? And you'll see that string once I console.log it. JSON text. Okay, here it is. That's just a string, right? And as you can see, it looks very similar to the object that we defined up here. The only difference really, there are a few differences, but at least here, the one that we can see is that the key values are surrounded by quotes, right? So you can see first name has quotes around it, last name has quotes, and age has quotes. So all of these key fields have quotes around it. Okay, so that's the only thing here that we see, as opposed to the object itself, right? The two other things that we can't do with JSON is that it does not support the undefined type. So if we have one of these be undefined and we try to convert this object, that would be excluded. It also cannot have functions. So these objects can, right? We can do that, but if we try converting it, if we create a function, that function will be removed. Okay, so no undefined, no functions, and all the key names have a quote around them. That's it. That's the only thing you need to really keep in mind. Okay, so this was to convert an object to JSON text and to convert JSON text back into an object. We can say let's call this person2 equal JSON dot parse. And this parse function accepts the JSON string. So we can pass this JSON text back in to this function, and now it will be converted back into an object. So now we can actually refer to person dot last name, for example. Right? And as you can see, we get Smith out. Right? So the reason why this is used so often is because it's very convenient for us to create an object on the client like this. We can then convert this to a string, right, with this. And since now this is just text, we can pass this to the server because it's just text. It's really simple to pass text across the web, right? The server can then convert it back into an object, and then it could then use it as an object like we are here, right? So that's why we use this so often. Okay, so it just means that we can pass objects across the web. Right. Okay. Next topic. This is a newer topic, and this is called destructuring. Weird name. So this is a newer JavaScript feature that allows you to, I'll use the term explode objects, cherry pick properties and assign them to variables in one shot. This is used a lot in Node when we import external modules, and when we get to Node, we'll see how that works. But for now, let's say we know we have this object, right? And let's say we want to create a new var, right, called first name, and we want to assign this to person dot first name. And then we want to create another here called last name, and we want to assign this to person dot last name. So what destructuring does is it will allow you to do these two operations. So the first operation is we are declaring first name, and the second operation is that we are assigning first name that's part of the object to it. Right? So what it allows you to do is allows you to do these two things at the same time. Okay, so for example, if we wanted to do this exact same thing, we could destructure the person object, and that would look like this. We can say, let's use this object syntax, which I don't like, but it's a little confusing. But this is just the way it is. We use this object syntax, and we give it the names that we want. So for example, we wanted the first one called first name. We wanted the next one called last name. And we set this equal to the object itself. Right? Very strange when you first see it. Pretty much what this means is we want to create a local var called first name, and we want it to be assigned the property first name that's part of the person object. We also want to declare a local var called last name, and we want it to be assigned the last name property of the person object. Okay, so in this particular case, this first name that we used has to match what's in this object, and this last name has to match what's in the object. Okay, so this one line does the same thing as these two lines. Okay, it's just a shorthand version of this. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So we can do console just to show you how this works. Console log first name, last name, and we should get John Smith. Now, there's also one other thing you could do with this is that there are sometimes where you don't want to use the operating name of this object. So you want this to be called something else. So you can use this colon syntax to do that. So you could do colon FN, to say for first name, and then colon LN for last name. So now, instead of using first name and last name, we could use FN and LN. Okay, and we run this, and again, we get the same results. Okay, so this is doing like 3 operations in one, really. Like first, it's creating a new local var called FN and LN, and then it's going to assign the first name of the person to FN, and then the last name of the person to LN. Okay. All right, so that's the structuring. Template strings. Right, these come in handy a lot in this class. So it defines strings using the backtick character. Right, that's this character here. It's not the single quote character. Just keep that in mind. To create multi-line strings that can also contain embedded expressions. Okay, so let's do an example. So we can do console log, and let's create a template string. So we're going to use the backtick character there, and inside of it, we want the word hello, and we want to embed. We want to include, for example, the first name and the last name of this object. And to embed things, we use this syntax. And inside of here, we could input any kind of expression. So we can do things like 2 + 2. It'll just equate to 4. But in this case, we want to include the FN, so for the first name. And then we want space, and then we want to embed the last name. Right? So it's going to look something like this. Right, and if we run it, we get hello, John Smith. And this is equivalent to string concatenation, right? So if we just have hello space plus FN plus space plus LN, right? So these two are pretty much equivalent. But as you can see, this is a much cleaner syntax than this. Right? You have all these extra pluses. You have this space to give the space between the first name and the last name. Right? It's just not very clean. All right. Two more things to cover. This also comes up a lot in this class. Truthy, falsy values. Truthy, falsy. Truthy, falsy. So let's define what this is. So these are non-Boolean values that equate to true Boolean, either true or false. So values that are falsy include the number 0, the number -0, an empty string, the null value, the undefined value, the NaN or not a number value, and of course the false itself. Okay, so all of these can equate to the false value. Okay, so a 0 is essentially can be seen as a false value. A -0, a false value, an empty string, false value, null, false value, undefined, false value, not a number, false value, and of course, false is false. So any other values, so values that are truthy, all other values. Okay. So for example, if we put this in an if statement, so if A, right? So this is a truthy value because it's a string that has something in it. In this case, A, it's not an empty string, right? So this is a true value, right? This if A is a true value. Not, it's not a true value, it's a truthy value, right? So this comes up a lot where, for example, if you want to check to see if the cars array has things in it, right? So you would typically have to do that with if cars dot length is greater than 0, right? So if that's true, right, then true if array is basically not empty, right? But we can take advantage of truthy also by just doing if cars dot length. Okay, so this is true if array is not empty. Exactly the same thing, right? Because if length has a value of 0, right, that will equate to a false value. And if length is greater than 0, then that's going to be referred to, that's going to be a true value, right? So to check to see if this cars array is empty or not, we can just write an if statement that if cars dot length. Right, so if you have an empty string, for example, if empty string, then this is a false if statement. And if we have a string with a empty character, right, this is a true if statement. Okay. And the way this is used in this class, for example, is we often want to check to see if an object is defined or not, right? So if we, for example, have let x, right? So x exists, we declared it, but we haven't assigned something to it. So x by default is going to be undefined, right? So we can't just assume x is defined. We might not know. So what we can do is we can do something like this. If x, then we know that x, then we know, right, x is defined, right? Because if x was undefined, then this will not be true. But if x is defined, then we know that this is true. All right. Finally, we are going to talk a little bit about try-catch blocks. Try-catch, finally. Okay, try-catch, finally, blocks are used to handle unexpected runtime errors, as well as controlling flow in custom error handling. Okay. And the way this works is we have a try block. So code that is error prone or we plan to throw an error. Okay, we want to throw the error ourselves. Then we have a catch statement with an exception. Okay, so here we put code that runs if there is an exception. Then we have the finally block, which we don't have to have, so you could leave this out if you like. And this contains code that always runs even if an error was thrown. Okay, so despite an error or not, this finally block always will run. Okay, so the idea behind this is we put the code that we think might have errors, or if we want to cause an error, create an exception to happen, we put that here. If an exception happens, code execution is stopped from that point forward, and it will jump to the catch block. And the exception is going to be included here. So this is used to sort of include what the exception is for. So, you know, trying to access something that's null or some kind of other exception, the exception name or the object or whatnot. So that is that's what gets passed to the catch. Then the code inside of the catch will run. And if we have a finally block, then the code inside there will always run. Okay, so a question from Miguel. Can't code run after the catch block without finally, regardless of error? Can't code run after the catch block?
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to ask because you said that the finally block is for code that is supposed to run regardless of error, but can't, you know, even without finally in the try catch block, can it still run after the catch parentheses or brackets, sorry?
You mean the code that we put in here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this code will run if there is an exception as well, if I didn't make that clear.
Okay. So
does that answer your
It does, but what I don't understand is because outside of that finally, right? Like if you write code after that finally.
Oh, here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be the same conditions?
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is if we just put the code outside, wouldn't that sort of be the same thing, right?
Right. Yeah. I was just trying to understand what the difference would be.
Yeah, that's a good question. There is a difference, and the difference is that you can have try-catch finalies inside of try-catch finalies, right? And if you have a case like that, and you didn't have a finally block, and you had an exception, for example, there could be a case where that code, even if you had it below the try block, won't ever run because that exception is going to get caught by the parent try block. If that makes sense to you.
Kind of.
So the case where we have something like this, we have, let's say we have another try block inside of this try block, right? And let's say we didn't have this finally here, and we had some code here, and we had a catch. We had a catch exception here. Okay. So a case like this, what's going to happen is if there is an exception here, right? If there's if something happens in this try block, the code will jump to this catch block, correct? And then after this catch block, we could throw another exception. If that makes any sense. I know this causes it to be a little bit complicated.
Yeah, it gets complicated.
So, okay. There could be another exception that's thrown here.
Okay.
If that happens, then we will jump from line 217 to this catch block here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and the code here will not run. However, if we have a finally block, even if we throw an exception here, the code in a finally block will run.
Okay.
So the code in a finally block is guaranteed to run, even though there are exceptions inside of the catch block.
I see.
Got it?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Good question there. All right. And that is pretty much it for our JavaScript reviews. There is one more topic called promises, and we'll cover them when we get to them. So I'll just add a note here. We'll review this later in the semester because we don't really use it at this point. Okay, so that was the basic JavaScript review. Hopefully we'll have enough time for this. All right, so now I want to jump to jQuery. So let's do that. So jQuery review. Okay, so let me first define jQuery. So jQuery is a JavaScript library to make your life easier, hopefully, and maximize compatibility. Okay, and this is more important here than writing S code, right? We want to maximize compatibility. What that really means is we want to be sure that the code that we write is going to work on all web browsers, across the board, old and new. jQuery is based on selectors and actions. Okay. The syntax of jQuery is going to use the $ symbol to refer to jQuery. And once we refer to jQuery, we pass it a CSS selector. Okay, so a CSS selector goes there. Then we have an action that comes after, right? So the idea behind it is we select either one element or more elements, right? Since we are going to pass in a CSS selector, we have a lot of ways to select things on the page, right? And then we can perform some action on those that we have selected, all at the same time. Okay, so for example, the val function is used to read input from form elements. Okay, so for example, we have this email address, and if we want to read this input, right, what we do is we first select that, and we can select that based on ID. We gave it an ID of email address, and to do that, we use the pound sign. So we do pound email address, right? So this is a CSS selector, right? So this pound just refers to a single element with this ID. And then we use dot, and we call the val function. Right? And that will read the value of this input and assign the value to email address. Okay. We can also use val to set a new value in the input, right? Or to change the value. So to set the value of our form elements, again, we select the form element, in this case, email address, and val. Let's say I want to set it to my email address. Okay, so we use the val function again. This time we pass in the string that we want to assign, right? And as you can see, the form element gets changed there. Okay. Let's say we wanted to select all divs on this page, right? So the CSS selector for that is just going to be div, right? Because if we did have a CSS style file and we wanted to apply a CSS style to all the divs, we would define that CSS selector with just the tag name, right? So it's just going to be div. So if we do this, this is going to return an HTML collection. So this is kind of like an array, HTML collection. So we'll just say similar to an array. Okay. Did I skip over for loops or loops altogether? I did skip over that. Oh no. Okay. Let's go over that real quick. I do want to add that. So skipped over that. All right, so it's before conditionals right over here. So let's do that. Loops. I'll do this real quick here. All right, so there are basically three types of loops. There is the for of loop, or there's the for loop. There's the for of loop. You can also refer to the array and call that for each, but I'm not going to go over that right now. And there's while and do while, which I'm not going to go over right now. Let's just go over the two types of for loops, the standard for loop and the for of loop, because that's just what comes up more often. So the standard for loop is we have for, we have a statement that gets run before the loop begins. So we use that, for example, to set an I index in this case. We then have the we have addition that is going to be used for the loop. So for example, while this index I is less than the number of elements in the cars array. So that's cars dot length. And then a statement that is run after each loop. In this case, we want to add 1 to the to I, right? So until this statement is no longer true, which essentially will loop over this cars array, right? So then inside of here, we can now use the I index and the cars array to refer to a single element in that array. So standard stuff, right? This really shouldn't be anything new. Then there's the for of loop, and we can use this for any array or collection. So in this case, we know cars is an array. So what we can do is we can say let car of cars. Okay, so it'll basically just loop through the cars array, and each time car would be equal to an element. Right, so then this we could just console log that element out, right? So these are pretty much equivalent, right? All right, I think that's all I'm going to do for now. So we're going to use a for of loop now. Let's come back up to jQuery, and we said that this selector will select all div elements and will return an HTML collection. So now that we you have an HTML collection, we can loop through that array or that collection. Okay, so let's do that. So for we'll say div of, and let's just select div here again. Okay. So this will basically loop through all the div elements, and we have three. We have the main container, and we have these two alert boxes, right? Then we could do something like console.log, and let's just log out the div elements, for example. So here they are. So the first div container, right? So that's this div right over here. And then we have the other two divs. So we have this alert right over here, and we have this alert here, right? Okay. So setting, so jQuery for setting or getting HTML or text in the document object model, or DOM. And those two functions are the HTML function and the text function. Right? So let's say we wanted to get the HTML or what's inside of this div alert here. So we can select that with alert 1. I gave it an ID, right? Yeah, alert 1. And then we can call its HTML function, and this will return what's inside of the div. In this case, it's just going to be plain text. But if we did have any HTML, then it will be returned. So for example, if I create a strong tag here, then that's what this is going to return. All right, so let's see that. Yeah, right over here. And we can use its text function, which comes in handy, and I'll explain why you might want to use one over the other. So let's say alert 2, and I should just do alert 1 again, and dot text. So if you do this, you'll see that all the HTML is going to be removed. So see that we only get this is an alert box, right? The strong tag has been removed. So what this text does is pretty much that. If you return text, any HTML that's within this element will be removed. If you use text and you try to include HTML inside of it, that HTML is going to be escaped, which means that it's not, your web browser is not going to actually display it as the HTML component or element. It's going to just display it as plain text. Okay. So that's the main difference between these two. So let me make a comment here for that. So the text will, I said escape. I think I really meant encode here, encode, or sometimes we can use these interchangeably. Escape all HTML. All right. Elements, attributes. Right. So we we need to be able to read attributes. So reading attributes. And we need to be able to set attributes. Okay, so first, let's do an example of how to read an attribute. So again, we'll select the div with an ID of alert 1. And to read or set attributes, we use the function attr. Okay, so it's just short for attribute. And if we just refer to the attribute that we want to read, in this case, we want to read the class of this alert 1, then the actual value that's assigned to this class attribute will be returned. Right? So in this case, we should get alert and alert primary. Right? So we should get that right there. Okay, so this is to read attributes. Also, we want to be able to set attributes. So that is done in a similar way. So again, we want to select alert 1. We use the same function. We refer to the attribute that we want to change, and then the next argument is what we want to assign it, right? So we know that this is an alert with a theme of alert primary. So if we wanted to change that theme, we could go ahead and do that. So for example, we want it now to be an alert ranger. And we run it, and you should see that it turns into a red box there. Okay, grading events, right? So this is important. We need to be able to create event, not grading events, grading event, being able to handle events. That is. So if we wanted to create a event handler for this click me button, again, we'll do a CSS selector, click btn. We use the function on, and the first argument is the event name, right? So in this case, we want to handle a click event. Then the next argument is the callback function, right? The function that's going to run or that's going to be called when this event occurs. We can create it. We can just create an anonymous function right inside of it, just like that. So we can do an alert, for example. You clicked me. We hit run. We click on the button and we get the alert. And we know that if we have the anonymous function, we can convert it to error function. So we can do that instead, and we should get the same result. Okay. I'm going to go a little bit past 8. So just to let you know. The next example that I'm going to do here is going to be a ask list. So actual, more of a real world application. Not really an application, just a little example. So the idea is I just want to create a basic task list. So I'll be able to add a new task, and I want to be able to remove that existing task, right? So I want an input here, right? That's going to accept the task name. I want a add button here. The tasks would then be added down here, and I want each one of them to have a remove button, where if I click on remove, then that task will be removed from the list. Okay. All right. So let's start out here with a div with a class of container. Inside of this div, let's create another div with a class of alert, and we'll give it a theme. Okay, and then inside of here, we want a form element, and we want this to be inline. Inside the form, we'll have an input, and this will have an ID of task, right? It's going to be what we want to save. Type of text, class of control, and we'll give it a right margin of 2. Placeholder of, let's just say, enter task. Okay, right after that input, we'll have an add button. So we'll have an ID with add task, type of button, class of button primary. We want it to say add task. See how it looks for now. That's fine. Okay. Right below it is where these tasks are going to be displayed. So for this, we want to use a bootstrap component, and that component is going to be the list group. Okay, so this gives us something that looks like this. Okay, and we can see the HTML for this is right below. So let me just copy and paste it, just like that. Okay, and you see that just an unordered list with a class of list group, and each one of the list group items has a class of list group item. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's just remove all of them and we'll create one here. So for example, watch movie. Okay. So we'll add the remove button in step 2. So first, let's just be able to add them, and then we'll add the part that we actually removed. Okay, so here's what we got here, right? So the idea, again, we're going to enter a task, we're going to click on add, and they're going to be added down here, just like this. Okay. All right, let me comment this out. I want this to actually remain here, but because I'm going to refer to it, but we don't want it to actually be here because we want to start out with an empty list. We also want to make sure this unordered list has an ID because we're going to have to refer to this. So we'll give this an ID of tasks. Okay, that's going to be enough for us to get started. So let's create the HTML for this. So this is going to be the task list example using jQuery. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to handle the event for this add task. So we will refer to it, add task, on, click, and anonymous function here. Okay. The thing we want to do first here is we want to read this input. Okay. So let's store it and read it. So let task equal to, well, again, we'll use jQuery. We'll refer to that input. I think I'll call it task.val. Right? So that's going to read read the task. Next, we want to create the list item. Right? We want to create this element here, this list item, with the task inside of it. Right? Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we need to create a new list item, and we can do that with jQuery, and it looks like this. I'll say let new li, as in list item, equal to jQuery. And instead of a CSS selector, what we'll do is we'll put the actual HTML tag that we want to create. The open and the close at the same time, right? So just an empty list item here. Right, so what this will do is this will create a new list item. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to change the class, or we want to set a class, right? We need to make sure the class of this element is list group item. And we learned here that we can set new attributes with using this ATTR. Right? So we will refer to new list item attribute ATTR. We want to set the class to list hyphen group hyphen item. Okay. So what we have here is we essentially have well, we're going to add the class attribute. Okay, so we have an empty list item. We've set the class for the list item, and now we want to set the actual contents of that list item. And we learned that above as well. We can use the text or HTML. In this case, we just want to be able to add plain text, so we'll use the text. So new list item dot text, and we'll pass it the task that we read up here. So now with these three lines, we have essentially created a new list item using the class and the task inside. So the only thing we need to do now is we need to append it, right? We need to add this new list item to this unordered list that's here. Okay, so we can use that with we can do that with the append. So the first thing we do is we refer to that unordered list, and we gave it an ID of tasks. Use the function append, and we pass it the new list item. And finally, once we've added it, it's a pretty good idea to just remove the task that we just clicked add. Right? So we want to just remove the text in this input. And we can just do that using this jQuery syntax and just pass it a value of an empty string. Okay, so let's give this a try. So watch movie. Attend CS157. Okay, so now the only other thing that we need to do is add that remove button here that what we discussed, so we can remove these tasks. The first thing I want to do is I want to actually add that button to this list item example that we did up here. So so that we want to be right over here. Okay, so we're going to create a button. That button, we want to make sure it has a type of a button. We also want to set some CSS classes. So btn BTN, we'll make it a red button, so we'll give it that theme. We also want to make sure this button, not ensure, it's not very important, but we want this to be a smaller button than this. So we don't want it to take up too much space. So for that, there is a CSS class, and that's BTN SM, SM being small. And then finally, we want to float this button to the right-hand side, because if you don't do a float, the button will appear right after each task, right? And it's not going to be in the same row, kind of. It'll just come right after where the task is, right? So we really don't want that. So we use the class float hyphen right, float right. Okay, and then finally, we want to name the button, so remove. Right, so let's run this and see how that looks, right? So this is what we want to get, right? So be able to remove it. So click on the remove, we want to be able to remove this whole row. Okay, so let's recomment this out. And go down to the code and recreate that. Okay, so let's go down here, right over here. So let's now add a comment here. So create the remove button. Right, so first thing we need to do is just create an empty button, right? So we'll call this REM BTN. We'll use jQuery. We'll create an empty button tag. Just like that. What we want to do next is we want to add all those CSS classes that we added here, right? So I'm just gonna copy them to make it easier. So I'll select all those classes, copy them, go down to the code, refer to the remove button, use the attribute, again, class, and paste in those classes. Right, it's going to create, that's going to add the class attribute. Finally, we need to set the button text. So we'll use the text function for that, remove. Okay, so let's add the event for it later. So let's just go ahead and add the button for now. Okay, so this button has been created, but it hasn't been added to the list item, right? If we take a look at our HTML that we created right over here, we see that the button is inside of the list item. Right? So we need to recreate that in code. So we have the new list item here, and we have the remove button right down here. So we can use the same append function to append the remove button to the list item. Right? So we'll do that down here. So we'll refer to new list item, and we'll append the remove button. Right? So add the remove button to the list item. And then finally, down here is where we append the entire list item to the unordered list. Add the list item to the unordered list. Okay, test. And as you can see, we now get the remove button. Yes, there's a question.
Yes, I've done things similar to this, and I think if I say I want to debug it, when I go view by source, the changes that I think I made, I don't think they show up. Is that correct?
If you view the page source, you will not see it. What you got to do is you got to inspect the page.
So I have to go into
Here,
the Chrome.
let me show you. Yeah. So I have open up in a new tab. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect. So don't, not really important what I select here. I'll just select this add button here. Then I'll go to inspect. That's going to take me to the web browser's debug window. And inside of the debug window here, we can see this unordered list that we have. And as
Okay.
we add a new task and we click on add, as you can see, we get the new list item right over here. Each time we click on add, you'll see down below a new item gets here, right?
So is that pretty much the only way then to kind of debug my?
We can debug it like this. We can also debug it if you want to step through the code, if that's what you're referring to. We can go down, we can go to the debugger right over here. We'll select our index page. We'll go down to the code that creates this. We'll put a breakpoint right over here. So I just selected line 114. I'll then enter a task. I'll click on add, and now it takes me to that line. And from here, I could hover over, for example, task, and right now it's undefined because we haven't actually ran the val here. So what I'll do now is I'll step through the code. So that's step over, or I can hit the F10. And now it goes down to line 117. And now I can hover over task and I see that it's set to test right here, right? And then again, I can hover over F10, new list item. I could then see the list item object here. I can then hover over again, just go through it step by step like this. Okay.
So later when we get into more difficult things, I have a hard time with asynchronous code.
Yeah, that's.
It
I
finishes.
think we all have a hard time with
Okay, so
asynchronous code.
that's,
So yeah, when we get to it,
3 weeks from now.
unfortunately, debugging with Node is not very good, and there are some tools, but it's not that great. But once we get to that point, then we'll go ahead and
Okay,
deal with that.
thank you.
Sure. All right, so one other thing that's left here is we need to be able to handle this remove, right? So when we click on the remove, this row is actually removed. So just like we were able to create an event using the function on based on a CSS selector, we can actually use the same on function on this remove BTN. So I'll show you two ways to actually do this. The first way is I'll actually include the code that removes this line right inside of this event handler. And then what I'll do is I'll move that code outside and show you how to do that as well. All right, so remove button dot on, click. Again, an anonymous function. And what we essentially do, actually, here's a good example of why we can't use it. We can't use why we can't use error function here. And that is what we really need to be able to do when this one of these remove buttons is clicked is we need to refer to the button itself. The reason why we need to refer to the button itself is because we need to find its parent, which is going to be the list item, because that's what we need to actually remove. So we typically do that if we have a regular anonymous function like this. We can refer to the pointer this. So by putting this in this anonymous function in an event handler, the value of this will be the actual button that's clicked. And again, the reason why we need that is because we need to refer to its parent so we can remove that list item. Okay. All right. So what we want to do now is this is going to be the HTML remove button, the actual element itself, which is the remove button itself. So what we want to do is we want to take advantage of jQuery, so we can just include this in the jQuery selector. So by doing this, we now have access to all the functions available to jQuery. If we did not do this, then we have to just use pure IS to remove it. Okay. So that's why we select the this selector. Okay, then what we do is we refer to this, which is going to be the button. We refer to its parent, so dot parent. Okay, so the button's parent is going to be the list item, right? As we can see here. The button's parent is the list item, which is the element that we need to remove, right? So parent dot remove. Okay, so on this remove, we'll just remove it. And that's it. So let's do a test, test2, and let's remove test2 and remove test. Okay, so in this way, we will actually have the code that removes the button inside of this event handler. And this is not really good because you don't want to put event handlers inside of event handlers, because these can have you can also include event handlers here, and it's just not easy to follow when you have all these event handlers inside of each other. So what I like to do in this case is just create a remove function outside. So we'll create a function outside here called remove task. And what we'll do is we'll just take this code, bring it down here, and instead of this anonymous function, we'll just refer to remove task, just like that. And this does the exact same thing, but it takes this code and it puts it, rather than inside of the event handler, it puts it on the outside here. All right, so if you want to debug it, it's a lot simpler. If you want to just go through your code, it's a lot simpler because you just see the function name. It says remove task. It's pretty self-explanatory, as opposed to this code being inside of here. Now you have to go through this event handler to find that code. So let's just give this a try and make sure it still works. Right. Okay, gonna stop there. Are there any questions before we call it a night? I went way over past time. Questions? Okay, just quickly going over the lab assignment for this week. All these examples that I did today using jQuery will come in handy when we're doing this example. How soon will a video be up? Usually gets posted within 3 hours after it's over. So you can check the Zoom page, which is right over here. Click on Zoom, and under Cloud Recordings, it'll appear here. Like I said, it usually takes about 3 hours for it to actually show up here. Okay, where was I? Okay, the lab assignment. All right, so just going to be using jQuery for these here. Parts 1 through 11. So it should be pretty straightforward, right? Just say hello button. So create an event handler for this and just create a simple alert. Create an event handler for the read beam button, read the value from the input, and add the word hello in there. So we'll just say hello, whatever name you put there. Here, what you're going to do is just going to take whatever input you put here, and you're going to inject that inside of this alert. Part 4 is you're going to use the show hide, which we didn't go over in these examples, but I have a jQuery reference for you. that includes them in there. So that's also going to help. And that jQuery reference is right over here. I believe it's in this page here. So we go over effects, and under effects, show hide. Okay, so show and hide. So that's what you're going to be using for part 4. Part 5, you're going to use the toggle, which is going to show hide all of these divs at the same time. Part 6 is pretty much what we just did with the remove button. So when we click on dismiss, we want to remove this entire div here. Okay. Part 7, when we click on the image, we want to output or console.log the source of this image. Should be pretty straightforward. Part 8, when we click on when we click on this image, the idea behind it is we want to use that image as a starting point, and then read the URL that comes right after the image, and then use that URL to set the source of the image, and the image will display. Part 9 is pretty straightforward. You just go ahead and create a simple object and add the email address and password in that object, and just console log that object. Part 10 is a task list, which is exactly what we just did. You can pretty much just copy and paste the code for that. Part 11 is we have this table here, which is not actually a table. This is an image. So this whole thing is an image. So the idea here is you're just going to recreate what you see here. So create an input for the course, create an input for the title, create the add button, create this table of 3 rows, right? A column for the course, a column for the title, a column for the remove button. The idea here is we put the course here, we put the course title, we click on add, and it'll add a new row to this table here. And the remove button will remove that row. And the clear all button will just remove all rows. Okay, so this also should be pretty straightforward. And I think you should be able to use this task list here and this example that we just did for this. Right? Okay, that should be all. Let me know if you have any questions or if there's anything I can help with. We usually have tutors for the class. As soon as I get their information, I will let you know. And I think that's it. Any other questions before we call it a night? Questions? All right, everyone. Hope you all have a good week. Have a good night, and we'll see everyone next Wednesday.
Thank you, Professor. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you. Have a good night.